Fatty liver disease used to be confined to adults who made very bad life choices. It's the product of alcoholism. All that drinking overloads the liver and it can't process the fat in the blood. The fat builds and builds until eventually causing organ failure. Over the last couple of decades, though, something very strange has happened in this country. Fatty liver disease has come to children.
This was not a childhood disease. This is just not something that existed. It was considered adult onset. Now we see this popping up among kids.
Obesity can mimic alcoholism. It drowns the liver in fat, and the rising rates of childhood obesity have left fully 1 out of every 10 kids with fatty liver disease. It's now common for children to suffer a condition that used to be confined to alcoholics. And this grotesque situation is directly attributable to this: the food pyramid.
All of our dietary recommendations were not just slightly wrong, but completely upside down.
This dusty government icon encouraged generations of kids to eat horribly.
It's just what you would do if you wanted to make a population obese and diabetic.
This is the story of how the food pyramid accidentally engineered a childhood obesity crisis, and why it was allowed to stand for decades until finally we flipped it.
The old food pyramid is probably one of the most damaging pieces of misinformation in the history of government and healthcare.
The food pyramid was fraudulent at its inception. It was born of a great act of scientific malpractice perpetrated by this man, Ancel Keys, who was once world famous for his crusade against heart disease.
Here are vital statistics. They show that this problem here in America is the worst in the world. Do you know the chief killer of Americans is cardiovascular disease? Our mode of life and our diet are involved.
He had a strong idea that saturated fat, such as you find in meat, cheese, butter, those are the major drivers of heart disease.
Keys pushed a seductively simple storyline. Eating animal fat like red meat and milk elevates the cholesterol in your bloodstream, which makes its way into your heart arteries, squeezes blood flow, and eventually causes a heart attack.
Cholesterol in the walls of the arteries, that's what does us in.
This was like 1953. He presented at a scientific meeting a chart of 6 countries that seemed to show a perfect association between heart disease and total fat consumption.
It seemed to me quite clear that there was some relationship between the diet and the incidence of coronary heart disease.
A statistician named Yerushalmi showed that there was actually 22 countries, not just 6, for which data were available on fat consumption. And that if you plotted all 22 of these countries on a chart, total fat did not seem to be associated with heart disease risk. And that infuriated Ancel Keys. He was ashamed in front of his colleagues. That's when he, out of rage and fury, went off and did the 7-country study. He cherry-picked the countries in order to get the results that he wanted.
Why did he pick these particular 7 countries? He literally excluded countries like Switzerland and France, which famously have all sorts of animal fat in their diets, but don't have high levels of heart disease.
Through fraud and force of will, Ancel Keys imposed his conviction on the American people. Eating animal fat will obviously give you a heart attack. It was uncritically repeated over and over and over in the popular press, to the point it becomes an unquestioned, obvious fact about your health.
There's absolutely no good evidence that dietary fat leads to heart disease. It took me years to sort of educate myself out of this fat phobia, simply because first you assume that the science is solid, so that you imagine if you eat a piece of bacon, then that fat somehow is going to find its way into your veins, right? Now, this picture is completely artificial.
And in 1992, your Department of Agriculture formally enshrined this truth in the food pyramid.
They take all of Ancel Keys' ideas. Saturated fat is bad. Carbohydrates should form the basis of a diet. So the big bottom slab is full of grains, pasta, breads, and up in the teeny tiny tip is the small amount of fat that you should be eating, if any at all.
The United States government then spends $700 million testing the pyramid against reality to show definitively, scientifically, that cutting back on animal fat and boosting carbs improves health. That study fails.
The Women's Health Initiative was the largest ever nutrition experiment ever undertaken on nearly 49,000 women, cutting back on meat, whole fat dairy, butter. And at the end of that study, it was devastating. It was discovered that women who stayed on this low-fat diet, they were not protected from heart disease. They were not protected from getting type 2 diabetes. They were not protected from any kind of cancer. So it was a devastating condemnation, really, of the diet that America had been told to follow. The scientific community couldn't tolerate those results. So they had to be rejected, and they were never included in any of the expert reports for the guidelines.
In his rush to be a heroic man of history, Keys had made a dangerous oversimplification. His simple story about cholesterol got reality exactly backwards.
So there's two kinds of cholesterol: low density lipoprotein cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, and then there's high density lipoprotein cholesterol, HDL cholesterol. The higher that is, the less we have a risk of a heart attack. The fact is that saturated fat is the only food that consistently raises your HDL cholesterol, your good cholesterol. Eat some butter, eat some meat, that raises your HDL. The Inuit in the Arctic had a diet of 70% fat. Half the year they lived on caribou, the other half they lived on seals and whales. They had no carbohydrates in their diet. In the early 1900s, they were studied and they were discovered to be in perfect health. The scientific explorer, he came back to New York and submitted himself to a year-long experiment of eating only meat and fat. People were outraged, thought they would die, and after a year, they were discovered to be in perfect health. But those results were ignored and considered irrelevant to Western populations.
The primary cause of heart disease is low HDL cholesterol and elevated levels of something called triglycerides.
Triglycerides are fatty acids circulating in the blood. They are not caused by the fat you eat. They are created from the carbohydrates that you eat. So you're talking about a lot of grains, pasta. So a low-fat diet consistently raises triglycerides and has been demonstrated to increase heart attack risk.
The food pyramid was perfectly engineered to elevate triglycerides, which drive not only heart disease, but obesity, diabetes, and cancer. And for decades, that same pyramid determined the food served to millions of children every day in public schools.
Kids are delivered lunches that are so fat poor. They get heaping servings of carbohydrates and bread, pasta, pancakes heaped with corn syrup.
Because if you eat 6 to 11 servings from this food group every day, it'll be real good for you.
I thought bread was fattening.
Wrong.
If they get any kind of cooked meat, it is almost always chicken. It is cooked in vegetable oils. And then they only get 0 or 1% fat milk.
One of the things that has become more of a hallmark in schools today is offering non-fat and low-fat milk choices.
Obesity rates in children were 6, 7, 8% in the 1960s. There was hardly any obesity among children. There was 0 diabetes. And then we got the US dietary guidelines, and every kid in America in a public school was getting that food. And obesity rates in the United States turn sharply upwards. I mean, all these diseases in children have grown in lockstep with the guidelines.
Every effort to fix the food pyramid has been minor, marginal, the product of a risk-adverse establishment. In 2005, the federal government introduced My Pyramid, a perfectly confusing image where the pyramid is still heavy on carbs, low on animal fat, and also apparently doubles as a Stairmaster.
And if you follow this diet, you're going to lose weight, you're going to be healthy. It's scientifically based, but it's also common sense.
In 2011, First Lady Michelle Obama replaces it with My Plate.
They slightly reduced the number of grains per day. They reduced the amount of protein. I mean, the changes have been marginal and really have not made any difference.
In 2025, this man, Marty Makary, took over the Food and Drug Administration, and he immediately went to war with the food pyramid.
It's been an open secret that the food pyramid has been corrupt for 50 years.
He called the war on fat a mistake.
And there's nothing wrong with fat. You don't need to serve kids low-fat foods like low-fat dairy.
And he pointed out the pyramid had fueled diseases in our children for generations.
This is something being done to children. The old food pyramid is probably one of the most damaging pieces of misinformation in the history of government and healthcare.
And he led the charge to do something that's nearly 40 years overdue. Flip it.
For decades, we've been fed a corrupt food pyramid.
We're all born into this profoundly complex system called the human body, a system that has evolved with the natural world for millions of years. A system with an ancient logic that's hard to see from our tiny little slice of time on the planet. The food pyramid was the ultimate expression of man's arrogance, of people fooling themselves into thinking they'd mastered something more complex than they could ever imagine. And our kids paid the cost of their delusions.